very much.
And at last, we're going to take the view from America, David. Not particularly encouraging, but then again, always room for optimism.
Thank you very much. I want to start by thanking the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, Dr. Boaz Ganor, Dr. Eitan Azani, for your wonderful work, which I believe not only protects Israel, but really protects all freedom-loving peoples. I also need to extend a special thanks to Dr. Boaz Ganor, sir, for your tireless efforts to grow the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism. It was through your efforts to grow your institution that I had the pleasure of meeting your right-hand woman, Hila Oved. And Hila and I got married last October. So I can say that the ICT has not only made me safer, it has made me much, much happier. Good things can come from counter-terror. I want to take a moment of personal privilege. My name is David Brog. I run an institution called Christians United for Israel. Some might find it funny that I'm actually Jewish. And some inevitably come to the conclusion that this Jewish guy working for this Christian organization must be one of those Jews for Jesus. I just like people to know who's talking to them. I happen to be a Jew by birth and a Jew by faith. But I'm one who appreciates those willing to stand with us. And more importantly, I'm a Jew who can count. And by last count, there are 5 million Jews in America, and that number is shrinking. There are between 50 and 100 million evangelical Christians in America. That number is growing. I think we'd be wise to try to expand the pro-Israel base to include them. That has become my job. Now that I've disclosed I'm Jewish, you won't find surprising that I want to cover 3 things very quickly with you. 1, the bad news. 2, the worse news. And then 3, the even worse news. That's what we do. But an optimistic conclusion awaits. Let's start with the bad news. Bad news. We are losing 2 very important groups in America, we being those who love Israel. We're losing the Democrats and we're losing the young people. Let's start politically. I want to read numbers to you. This is a poll done in July of people who favor or are more sympathetic with Israel than they are with the Palestinians. And as we go across the political spectrum from right to left, the number of those who sympathize more with Israel than the Palestinians starts high and steadily shrinks. Conservatives, 77% sympathize with Israel. Republicans in general, 73%. Moderates in the Republican Party, 64%. Independents, 45% sympathize with Israel. Democrats, 44%. Liberals within the Democratic Party, 39%. You know, I don't want to get too political. There are those here who are critical of President Obama's policies. They often say that he must be a Muslim or he must hate Israel. I have a much more frightening theory that I'd encourage you to contemplate. I believe that President Barack Obama is a liberal. His views on Israel and this conflict are similar to the views of liberals, be they Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, when it comes to this conflict. He's not an outlier. He's not a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon. He's the future, given the trends within this party. And like I say, his views are typical of those within the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, more inclined to overlook some of the evil aspects of Islamists and the Palestinian embrace thereof, more inclined to place blame on Israel for the stalemate in the peace process. Let's move to young people, our future. As you go from older to younger, the numbers of those who sympathize primarily with Israel and its conflict with the Palestinians steadily declines. Over 65, people over 65, 60% sympathize with Israel. Between 50 and 64, it drops to 56%. Between 30 and 49, it drops to 47%. Under 30, only 44%. A minority of Americans under 30 sympathize primarily with Israel. During this last operation, polls were taken in late July, 2 of them, which I found shocking in their results. Young people between 18 and 29 years of age, when asked who was to blame for this recent conflict, Hamas or Israel, a majority, 29%, said Israel. A minority of 21% blamed Hamas. That number for people under the age of 30 was worse than our number among liberal Democrats, where at least they were split 30-30. 30 blamed Hamas, 30 blamed Israel. So that's the bad news. We're losing Democrats and young people. Here's the worst news. This snapshot is not static. This isn't a static situation that is not changing. This is a moving situation that is going downhill rapidly. Those numbers I just gave you about people blaming young people, blaming Hamas, blaming Israel more than Hamas in this recent conflict, that wasn't the case back in 2009. When Israel was battling Hamas back in 2009, 23% of people under 30 blamed Hamas. Only 14% blamed Israel. It's flipped since then. And back in 2006, the numbers are even more stark. They blamed Hezbollah over Israel by a margin of 30-10. So we've gone from 30-10 to 23-14 to now we have a situation where a majority of young people are blaming Israel. It's disintegrating before our eyes in the past decade. Some people say, well, you know, young people, they're going to grow up and they're going to get more conservative. Not to worry. Well, that doesn't explain the rapidly disintegrating support among American young people for Israel. It doesn't explain why these young people are less mature than those young people a decade ago. And it doesn't ring true to my life experience. I understand that as people age and get jobs and pay taxes, they might get more fiscally conservative. But I've never seen young people age and get a deeper, more nuanced understanding of Middle East politics. And that's what it takes to understand Israel's struggle for survival. People think it can't happen in America. I'd point to 2 things. Number 1, France. 1967, France was Israel's strongest ally. That has changed, I fear, irreparably. Countries can turn and turn permanently. Number 2, I'd look at mainline Protestants in America. 1967, mainline Protestants, not evangelical Protestants, were Israel's best friends in America. They lobbied on Israel's behalf. The Presbyterians were the strongest of all. A few months ago, the Presbyterians took a vote to divest from an evil Middle Eastern country. It wasn't Iran, it was Israel. Things can change, things can flip. We see generational shifts. We're seeing it with Israel today. Last piece now. So bad news, losing Democrats, young people. Worse news, it's progressively worse. Even worse news, the bulwark, the safety belt, our safeguard for American support for Israel is this evangelical Christian community. You know, by some definitions, evangelicals account for 1 in 4 Americans and 1 in 3 Republicans. And they're the most active ones. They're the ones who are voting in primaries. They're the ones who are influencing the direction of Republican leaders. Evangelical Christians, we've always seen them as our safety belt, our stronghold in America. Well, among young evangelicals. We're seeing the same thing we're witnessing among young people in general. They are changing their views on Israel and changing their views rapidly. Just a few highlights. In the year 2010, 3 movies came out targeting not just Israel, but Christians who support Israel. An effort to convince Christians that Israel is not a Christian value. 2013, another movie came out. In 2010, Bethlehem Bible College down the street in Bethlehem started their Jesus at the Checkpoint conference. You get the imagery? If Jesus were alive today, he'd be a Palestinian being checked by Israelis at the checkpoint. He'd be occupied, not by Romans, by Jews. They had 250 people attend. This last year, they had 1,000. And more, we are seeing young people being brought on trips to a place called Palestine where they're taught a one-sided anti-Israel narrative, and without knowing better, they are believing it. I often wondered who's funding all these trips to Palestine. Thanks to Gerald Steinberg, I found out in part a nice Jewish boy by the name of George Soros is funding about half of them. Time doesn't permit me to give more examples, but the game is on. What was done in France, what was done to the Presbyterians is now being done to the evangelicals. A concerted effort is being made to speak to them in their language, to say Jesus stood with the oppressed and the downtrodden and the meek. And you must understand that in this conflict, the Palestinians are the oppressed and the Israelis are the oppressors. And without knowing better, they are believing it, they are buying it, and they're taking a stand, as they believe Jesus would, against Israel. That's the worst news. If the evangelicals go the way of the Presbyterians, and they can, goodbye, America. America will go the way of France if the evangelicals go the way of the Presbyterians. Here's the good news. Gotta end on a happy note. As we watch what is being done today to the evangelicals, as we study what was done in the past to the Presbyterians, we realize something. This is not the inevitable flow of nature. We are not battling forces beyond our control. These are concerted efforts made by Israel's enemies to go out and teach this anti-Israel narrative, to do it boldly, to do it unashamedly, and to do it every single day. Well, if this is the result of human effort, then it can be countered by human effort. And that's exactly what we're doing. I come to you after a week with a group of young evangelical leaders. We're doing now what the other side has been doing to such great effect for them. But instead of teaching them the lies of the anti-Israel narrative, we're teaching them the truths about the Middle East. They all came with the typical concerns. What about all the civilians Israel is killing in Gaza? What about the occupation? What about the settlements? And aren't Israelis foreigners in this land anyway? They left understanding everything you all know. That the Jews are indigenous to this region, that the Jews are fighting for their survival, that there would be no occupation if the Palestinians would have accepted one of many offers for a state of their own, and that when Israel battles Hamas in Gaza, they are trying their best to protect civilians while Hamas is doing everything within its power to kill civilians on both sides. They went home saying, we are with you. We are connected. We know this rising generation. We know the opinion leaders. We know the filmmakers. We know the lecturers. We're going to get them to go on your trip to Israel. We got to share the truth with this generation. Humans did this. Humans can fight back. I just want to close with this thought. There's been lots of talk ever since I was young about just how terrible you Israelis are with Hasbara. I'd like to offer a thought. You are taking the supreme risks. You or your sons or your husbands were the ones to go fight in Gaza. You're on the front lines. I think the least we in the diaspora can do is to make sure that we take responsibility for explaining your actions to a slow and sometimes dim-witted public. And we can do it better than you because we know them. We are them. We're their neighbors. We're their friends. Why is that your job? You're doing the hard job. You're doing the dangerous job. Ours is easier. We don't have to risk our lives. We don't have to encounter bullet fire. But if we do our job and do it well, if we make sure that terror doesn't pay, if we tell our truth as boldly and as repeatedly as they spread their lies, then maybe one day your sons won't have to encounter that danger. Our job might be easier, but I don't think it is one bit less important. Because as everyone on this panel has stated, there is a connection. Terror pays because idiots fall for it. Enough of being ashamed. Enough of nuancing ourselves into paralysis. Israel, with all of its warts, is a moral country fighting a moral battle. It is exhibiting here in this very difficult land the very best of Judeo-Christian ethics. We have to go boldly, proudly, without any shame, and make sure our neighbors understand that. That's our job, not yours. Just keep doing your work as well and as carefully and as morally as you have been. Thank you.